Welcome everybody as you're joining us. I see there's over 130 already, so
yeah,
give it a couple of minutes.
Yeah.
Georgia, Joanna's in the attendees room.
I'll start. Just welcome everybody. You're all very welcome this evening. And my name is Mary Skillington. I'm a lecturer on the Early Childhood Education and Care programme at GMIT on the Mayo campus. And just a very warm welcome to you all from the west of Ireland as you join our Leave No Stone Unskipped conference. It's jointly hosted by GMIT and the Children and Young People Services Committee in Mayo. So it's a pleasure to have so many people on the call from such a wide range of locations. So we thought to start with that we would have a poll to find out where people are from. So I'd like to ask people if they wouldn't mind logging on to menti.com. It's menti.com. It's in our chat box at the top of the chat box. So I'll give people a minute to log on to menti.com. And once you're on menti.com, you're asked for a unique code. And the code again is in the chat box, but I'll call it out to people. So it's 17063476. And I'll repeat that again. It's 17063476. So just to let us know where you're joining us from this evening, and I'll give it a couple of minutes to populate. And while that's populating, I'll just share some messages, I guess, for our weekend. We're so excited to have amazing speakers, wonderful workshops, and I know everybody's going to go away with lots of practical ideas. It's a little bit ironic that we're online for an outdoor play conference, but it has given us some opportunities to do invite people we may never have had the opportunity of inviting. So our hashtag on social media is #OutdoorPlayGMIT. So please tweet throughout the weekend and get us trending. That would be great. And the session is going to be recorded and we're live on YouTube. So it's a webinar. So the video and audio function participants is switched off at the moment. And during presentations, please use the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. So there's a Q&A box there where you can post any questions for Angela. And we'll go through the questions after her presentation. So at about 8 o'clock, we'll go through the questions that arise for you. If you have any technical issues, we'd advise that you log out and log in again, and hopefully that will resolve any issues that you may have. So now I'm going to share my screen and just share where we are where we're from. Here we go. I hope you can see that. So we have, oh my goodness, we have, it's Castlebar, Sligo, Limerick, Mayo, Carlow, Donegal, Waterford, Ennis, Limerick City, Inishowen in Donegal, Swansea, South Wales, very welcome, Denny in Scotland, thank you Denny, Kildare, Roscommon, Belcarra, New York City, Clonbur, Ohio in the United States, Wexford, the east coast of the United States, I'm missing loads, I'm sure. Will I see? So I can't pronounce it. I think it's a Welsh name. It's like Myrtle. I'm sorry about that. Vancouver in Canada, Ohio, Colorado, USA. I mean, this is just incredible. You are all so very, very welcome. Wait till I see if I can identify. New York City, Peterborough on Canada, Birmingham, UK, West Limerick. We would never have had this reach if we weren't online. North Cork, Canada again, Wales, Ennis. So a very, very warm welcome to you all. I'll stop sharing my screen for now. And before we start to meet, to have our presentation from Angela this evening, I would just like to welcome Dr. Orla Flynn, who's the president of GMIT, to say a few words. And she will be followed by Jarlath Munnelly, and he will say a few words, and then I'll introduce Orla.
Mágat Mary agus tá fáilte mór rih gacéine go dtí an cobáil speisialta seo. This is a very, very special evening, very special conference, in fact, this evening. And I would like to echo Mary's earlier words in sending you all a very warm West of Ireland welcome. I think the name of the conference is wonderful, No Stone Unskipped. And I think the topic of the conference is very topical, given the year that we've just had. And I suppose when we think about skipping stones or skimming stones, I remember growing up as a child in New York City, a child of immigrant parents, both of them Irish, and having the great experience of the concrete New York City. And there was a park and a river, near the East River, near enough to us. And we used to go to the park and pretend we were in Ireland on holidays, because in Ireland, the door was opened and we were allowed to be outside all day, every day. And that sense of freedom, that sense of connection with nature and the outdoors is something I think that resonates with all of us since childhood, especially those of us that have been fortunate enough to have had that kind of experience. I just wanted to say that today is a beautiful partnership. Actually, it's a partnership between our outdoor education lecturing staff and our early childhood, early years educators. And this has been an area of quiet, confident growth in GMIT, led from the wonderful colleagues that we have there in the Mayo campus in these areas. And as a newcomer to GMIT, I'm still saying that I'm a newcomer, but I'm here a year now. And I've learned an awful lot from some of our virtual open days. I've learned about the links between our programs and the deep connection with the outdoors. Mayo is known as the Adventure County, Ireland's Adventure County. And I know that is something that we will be hoping to build on and to grow in the years ahead. Not only is it a partnership between our early years and outdoor ed, but we also have the support of CIPSE, the Children and Young Persons Services Committee, and also we've had very welcome funding from the Healthy Ireland initiative. I've had the privilege of seeing some of the workshops already, and I think there's a real treat in store between the speakers that you're going to hear both this evening and tomorrow, and also some of the workshops. And as a keen gardener and as a beginner beekeeper myself, this is an area that's very close to my own heart. I'm really delighted to have been asked to say the few words of welcome, and I'm looking forward to seeing a bit more, following it on Twitter. I would say our Twitter hashtag is hashtag #OutdoorPlayGMIT. So if you're tweeting, make sure that you put in the hashtag, and we'll see. I'm looking forward to hearing about your thoughts on this conference over the next day or so. So I want to say thank you to all the team, all the backroom team, to Mary, to Georgia, to Joanne, to Louise. Thank you also to Jarlath, who you'll hear from shortly. And again, warm welcome to Angela Hanscom, who's our guest keynote speaker this evening. So again, a wonderful treat in store. And with that, I will hand back to you, Mary, I think, or is it directly to Jarlath, and to say best of luck and thanks for having me on.
Thank you, Orla. Thanks, Mary, for slipping me in there. I'd like to just introduce myself. I'm Jarlath Munnelly. I'm the Mayo SIPSI coordinator. I'm coming to you from the outdoors, actually, this evening in County Mayo. I thought earlier on it would be a good idea to, it being an outdoor play conference, to do my piece outdoors, but it has started to rain on me here, so this is going to be very short. So really, there's just two things I want to do. Firstly, I'd like to thank everybody who's been involved in organising this conference. Mary and Orla both mentioned this is a partnership, but certainly GMIT have done the work on this, and I'm really glad that SIPSI is associated with it, but I'd really like to thank Mary, Georgia and her team for all the work that they've put into it. Mayo SIPSI, which I'll explain a little bit about in a second, we have Stephen from Outdoor Education involved with us in one of our subgroups, and we have Mary Skillington involved in one of our subgroups as well. And we have that brilliant partnership of early years education and also the outdoors education, and it comes together very well with things like this for us. So my job is I'm Children and Young People Services Committee Coordinator, or SIPSI as we call it. And there's one of those in every county in Mayo, or in every county in Ireland. And I suppose it's a partnership between all the different agencies, statutory and voluntary, that work with children and young people. And I suppose our goal formulate a plan that's got goals in it that we then work towards achieving. And in Mayo, one of the things that's very much in our plan is promoting outdoor play. We have an early years subgroup who have very much led on this particular project. And that early years subgroup, which is led by Talma Bran, chairperson from the HSE, that subgroup, one of its big priorities is promoting outdoor play. That we have an early years strategy for 0 to 3 year olds. And again, one of the objectives of that is about outdoor play. So I'm very lucky that in Mayo and our SIPSI, there are lots of people who really value and really value outdoor play, see the value of it, and are actively trying to promote it and see it as something that's very valuable. I mean, a lot of the experts that you're going to hear from this weekend will articulate that far better than I could, but it's certainly something that we have identified. And I suppose it's because of the interests of the people who are involved in the SIPSI, and also the very beautiful county we have. It's got really incredible outdoor amenities that are just there in nature. So I think in a way it would be a shame if in a county like Mayo, if we didn't embrace the outdoors. And thankfully we do have some champions who are publicising that. And I know there's an awful lot of people who are interested in getting more involved. So that's all I really have to say. And like everybody else here, I'm really looking forward to listening to the contributions and the workshops over the weekend. And I think it's going to be very exciting. Thank you to everybody. I'm blown away by where people have come from to join us this evening. And thank you for tuning in. And I hope you get to see something of what we have to offer here in Mayo. And once again, thanks to everybody who's involved. So back to you, Mary.
Thank you very much, Jarlath and Orla. And I'm absolutely delighted, and why we're all here this evening, to extend a very warm welcome to Angela Hanscom, who joins us from New Hampshire. So Angela, for people who may not know, is a paediatric occupational therapist and a founder of the wonderful nature-based program called Timbernook. So I'd highly advise you to look at the website and the amazing blog that she has, which has gained huge popularity, and particularly in current times. She has a master's degree in occupational therapy and an undergraduate degree in kinesiology, the study of movement, which is something that's very, very close to my heart, because I think children need those huge opportunities for movement. It's children's first language, and I don't think we give it enough credit really in relation to development. If anybody hasn't got her book, it's well worth buying. So she's the author of the book Balanced and Barefoot: How Unrestricted Outdoor Play Makes for Strong, Confident and Capable Children. The other thing is she has an amazing TED Talk that has been viewed by over 110,000 people. And it's called The Real Reason Children Fidget, REAL in capitals. So I am just delighted to welcome you, Angela, and thank you very much. And we look forward to the Q&A after your session.
Thank you for having me. It's I would much rather be in Ireland right now, but this will have to do. And it's exciting to be able to have an opportunity like this and just jump on. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. All right. All right, so we are going to be talking about what has been happening to child development in the past 30 years due to the reduction in the amount of outdoor playtime children are getting. I always start my presentation with talking a little bit about my story behind how I started this work. Pediatric occupational therapists typically don't work outdoors, and so there was quite a journey that got me out in the woods working with children. So this is my family. It's actually an outdated photo. I need to update it. I've got a 15-year-old daughter, Joelle, a 12-year-old daughter, Charlotte, and then Noah is now 5. So, and this is my husband, Paul. But I've worked in all different settings. I've worked in mental health. I've worked in the school setting with children. I worked in a hospital setting with adults, and I've worked with preemies when they first go home. But most of my experience before I started the program Timbernook was actually in a sensory gym, in a clinic setting. And a doctor will refer for occupational therapy if there's any issues with attention or balance, sensory issues like not liking their hands getting dirty, that sort of thing. So kind of a series of events happened in my life that again got me on this path. As you're going to learn, none of this was my plan. I really feel like this is what I'm supposed to do. This is my mission. So I guess what happened first was I worked in a clinic setting where we had a wait list that went out at least a year for occupational therapy. And so children had to wait a complete year to get in. We kept hiring more and more occupational therapists for our clinic, and we were running out of room. And I remember thinking, why the rise in the need for occupational therapy? What is going on here? I had a child come in that didn't tolerate wind in his face, and they were, wanting to know how I was going to treat that in a clinic setting. And I just really struggled with those issues. Like, what do I do? Put a fan on the child? What is going on here? A lot of children are having trouble with balance. It's actually the number one thing that we have to treat in a clinic setting right now is it's children's balance systems. And then a lot of kids are not tolerating getting dirty. So I was just paying attention to this. When my second daughter was born, I actually decided to stay at home. I had no plans to work for a while and just enjoy their childhood. So I did. I ended up staying home for a couple of years. And my oldest daughter was 5 at the time, and she was just about to enter kindergarten. And what happened was the teacher met with us ahead of time and said, this is not kindergarten like you remember growing up. She said, this is really the new first grade. And she said, we will not have time to teach your children how to cut with scissors. So she said, I'm going to have my husband pre-cut everything at nighttime so we don't have to worry about that skill. We will have 5 minutes for snack, she said. But if that gets in the way of curriculum, it will become a working snack. Then they had 15 minutes for recess. And when it snows, they said that they were going to bring the children indoors for an indoor recess because, again, they don't have time to change the children. So I, right away, as a developmental therapist, I knew that this wasn't right, and that these were all important skills to learn in kindergarten. But I really enjoyed kindergarten growing up. I grew up in rural Vermont. I live in New Hampshire now, and we had a full hour of recess. Kindergarten was just in the morning, and it was all play-based. So I wanted to give it an opportunity. But what happened is my daughter started coming home a month into the programming saying, I hate school. That broke my heart. And so I ended up pulling her out of school. Again, not my plan, but I homeschooled for a couple of years. And I started to learn about different educational philosophies like Reggio Emilia, where the environment is the third teacher, and Waldorf. And a lot about Finland, where they were in the river dissecting fish to learn about it. They were much more laid back than we are here in America. but their test scores were way higher in science and math. And so that really fascinated me. At the same time, I live on 12 acres of woodland, and we have about 50 acres of conservation surrounding that. So we really live in the boonies, and we take a shortcut sometimes through a neighborhood to get to our property. And it just dawned on me one day that I didn't see any children playing outside. And I kind of was thinking about that. Like, I barely ever see children playing outside in that neighborhood. And I know that there's children living there. And I just kept thinking, where are the children? What is going on? So, and that was about the same time where I started to realize there was a rise in OT. And there was a big New York Times article that came out that the past 10 years, there's been a significant increase in the amount of children needing services. So I knew I wanted to do something outdoors with children. I thought it was in the form of nature classes till I ran my first one. And I had a parent come up to me with her child in hand and ask me, can you tell my son why the leaves change color? And I said, I think it has something to do with a pigment, but I would have to look it up for her. And it was a humbling moment, but it really reminded me, you know, what am I doing? What does an occupational therapist have anything to do with nature programming? And then I started to realize that, you know, I'm not, you know, typically at the time, it was really educators running nature programming or naturalists or environmentalists here. And so I really thought about our profession and how the occupation of a child is play. And it's a really important occupation. And we're very good as therapists bringing everything indoors. So we'll bring a little box of sand inside. We'll bring our swings indoors. We bring board games inside. And I kept thinking, what about the occupation of outdoor play, which is a super important occupation? And, you know, it's at risk in a very big way. And so that really began my mission of running programming. I had a friend suggest I start with doing summer camps because there was a lot of interest in that here in America to do summer programming. So I did. I ran my first year. I did 3 weeks of summer camp because my friend, again, recommended that. I was just doing it for my family and the community. And she recommended you know, going to the university and getting OT students. I thought that was a great idea. Occupational therapy students, they're always looking for field work experiences and volunteer work. And I thought, what a great way to show them the outdoors for its therapeutic value. So I essentially ran 3 weeks of summer camp with volunteers that were therapy students. I had no idea what I was getting into or how much work it was. Typically, a therapist will work one-on-one with a child in order to treat them, or we work in small groups, but we're not used to managing larger groups of children. So after the 3 weeks were over, they were hugely successful. But I was like, oh, that was a lot of work. I'm all done. That was a lot of fun. I really thought I was done. But what happened was those OT students went back to the university and told other OT students. And I had 15 volunteers for the next year. So I also had a teacher at that time, and actually 2 teachers reach out to ask if they could help with the program. And one of them said, wouldn't it be fun to do stories out in the woods? She said we could do, for instance, 3 Little Pigs, and we could do build little houses out of hay, bricks, and sticks at the table, and they can reenact it. And as a therapist, I felt like, wouldn't it be great to bring real bricks out into the woods and bales of hay and piles of sticks? And then the children, after hearing the story, the puppet show, 3 Little Pigs, they would have the opportunity to build their own homes out of brick, sticks, and hay, and engaging the muscles and moving around the environment. And she said yes. And so that began moving our programming the first year. When I ran it by myself, I was all about entertaining the kids. And the next year, right away, it was about having an experience. So the children will live and breathe stories out in the woods to, we work from 18 months all the way through middle school, age 14. to being able to do, for instance, older children might have a giant ball run that they construct out in the woods. That just the other day they did leprechaun traps. Yesterday they did a wizard science lab out there. So we use environment to inspire play and to bring back the occupation of play. So every year I would do it for one more year, and I thought, I'll just do it one more year for my children and for my community. And what happened was about 3 years into it, I released my camps in February, and because here in America, again, you have to release them way ahead of time. It's just part of our culture. And they filled in 1 minute. I had 4 weeks of summer camp. At 9 o'clock, I released them 9:02. I had a wait list for all 4 weeks. I had parents calling in tears saying, hey, my kid got into your program last year, but didn't get in this year. What are you going to do about that? And I said, I don't know, because it wasn't my plan, again, to work and to be running summer camps all summer long. I had a family I was raising. And that was around the same time I had 2 therapists call and ask a physical therapist and an occupational therapist if they could replicate our program. They thought, this is really unique for our profession. Would you mind sharing it? So that's when I realized that this had nothing to do with me, and that was a gift that had been given that had to be shared. And so that's when we created Timbernook. And my plan again was to market in New England because that was the logical thing to do. But I wrote an article called Why Kids Fidget and What We Can Do About It, and it went incredibly viral. It got picked up by the Washington Post, and then that went viral. They sold world rights to it. And so then the Times of India, Jerusalem Post picked it up. And that's how I ended up on doing a TED Talk for Johnson & Johnson on their main stage. I've done a more recent TED Talk. I think that's the one that was mentioned recently. But that's how the book came about. And this message that we're going to talk about tonight about what's happening when we overly restrict children's ability to play and move over and over, and how it's affecting them neurologically. So that's how Timbernook went all the way across the world. It's now in 4 countries. It's in Australia. It's throughout Canada, United States, and we also have a site in London. So in 2012, I got asked to observe a 5th grade classroom. This was a popular charter school known for art and music. These children had a 30-minute recess session, which in America, we are only giving them about 20 minutes on average for recess. So that's a little bit better than most places. But this teacher called me up. She knew I was an OT. It was before Timbernook, the year before Timbernook, and she said, can you please observe these children? Give me some activity ideas. I cannot teach them. They're fidgeting like crazy. So I went in, and kids were literally leaning back in their chairs at extreme angles. So there was only 1 point of contact left on the ground. So multiple children were doing that. Another child was rocking in his chair back and forth. One was hitting his head with a plastic water bottle. There was a couple children that asked to use the restroom or get up and sharpen their pencils, but almost everyone except one little girl in that classroom were fidgeting in extreme ways. And I asked her, what do you do for fun? And she said, dance and gymnastics almost every day. So that will make sense in a minute. So that really intrigued us, and we decided to do a pilot study at that school. And we tested their core strength, the children's core strength, so their stomach muscles and back muscles. And we also had them spin in circles. So we were looking for a normal balance reaction. So you can try this at home, but if you try spinning 10 times in one direction, you're working on one inner ear. And if you spin 10 times in the other direction, you're going to work on the other inner ear. You're going to work on your balance. Then try doing it with your eyes closed. So when you take away the visual sense, you're really going to ignite the balance sense. And so we had them do that. And what we want to see after spinning is their eyes should move back and forth in a vigorous way. It's called nystagmus. So we're looking for a normal nystagmus response. Now, after a minute's time, the eye movements should stop. If a child has nystagmus that goes beyond a minute, that means they have a very sensitive balance sense. If there's no eye movement at all after spinning, again, you can test this out at home. That means there's dysfunction with the vestibular sense. What we saw when we had kids spin is some kids would shuffle around in order to like modulate and control their spinning. Other kids were following their arm around. Kids were falling on the ground. A lot of kids didn't have any nystagmus at all. And there was a good portion that had excessive nystagmus. And when we combine that with having a normal core strength and meeting the averages from 1984, which was my generation growing up, so the averages back then, we found only 1 out of every 12 children could meet the averages for core strength back in the early 80s and have a normal balance reaction. So that was really eye-opening, and it really intrigued me. So we started interviewing teachers that had been around for at least 30 years, veteran teachers. And were they seeing a rise in sensory issues and motor issues like we were in the field of occupational therapy? Because we were at the point where our caseloads are overwhelming. We just can't meet the demand. So yes, and it doesn't matter where I'm speaking. This is an issue with a lot of children in the past 30 years. So number one issue teachers are reporting is decreased attention. One teacher said in the past, about 30 years ago, she was able to teach the whole classroom as a whole. She said maybe 1 or 2 kids had trouble paying attention back then. Now on a good day, she finds there's at least 8 out of the 26 kids that are struggling to pay attention. Posture is changing. So physical therapists and chiropractors are seeing this pre-adolescent posturing. So this upper curvature of the spine from an earlier age. They're also treating back pain at an earlier age. So that's very interesting. And that makes sense because if your core strength isn't quite where it should be, and you're carrying around these heavy backpacks, but also the other issues, right? Looking at screens is an issue. So posture is changing. That means gait is going to change. Kids are falling more. And this is not one I believe till I saw it myself. I was in a classroom and a child fell onto the ground. And the teacher said, okay, that's the 3rd time today. Please get back in your seat. A director of a Reggio preschool for over 40 years. I remember her saying, I don't remember this being an issue in the past, she said, but kids are literally now running into each other more frequently, running into the walls more often, and falling out of their seat multiple times a day. All of this will make sense in a minute. Increased aggression, but not bullying per se, but almost that kids are having more trouble keeping their hands off each other. So when they go to play, they're playing with much more force, knocking kids over. They go to play tag and they're hitting too hard. And so some schools are starting to actually ban tag or come up with rules, not understanding why this is happening in the first place. Emotional. Kids are getting much more easily frustrated, crying at the drop of a hat, less impulse control, more frustrated as well. There's been a huge rise in anxiety and depression. The pandemic is not helping, as you know, but this was already an issue before the pandemic hit. And so there's been a lot of research on that. And then another one that's really interesting is that play is changing. So they saw a lot more, rhesus monitors saw a lot more imaginatory type play years past. And now they're seeing much more like playing a game, a structured game, or playing on and off a play structure. So what is going on? A lot of these children are coming up less prepared than ever before. We're hearing reports of the hand strength isn't quite where it should be. Emotional regulation, ability to control emotions, even activity level, like their arousal levels are way up here, is not quite where it should be. Their core strength, all those foundational skills for learning, attention, yet we're expecting a higher level. We're expecting kids to hold pencils at an earlier age. They're expected to read in kindergarten now. And so there's this big mismatch. And what's happening is a lot of kids are getting pulled out for extra services from a very, very early age. A lot of this has to do, there's many factors in society, as we all know, that contribute to this. One major one that most of us know about already is the increase in technology use. And there's so much out there that I still have to learn, but my biggest problem with it is not only is it probably overstimulating in some ways, but it's replacing a lot of the time that they would be playing outdoors and digging in the dirt, going upside down, and moving the body in ways that would help organize the brain and develop the muscles and senses in the way that we're designed to do. So that's what we're really going to focus on tonight. This part's really important, so I will make sure that I take my time with this. One of the major issues that's happening is that kids are constantly in this upright position. So they're often being driven to school, they're sitting for hours. I was sitting in a study a couple of years ago of about how many hours children are actually in a seat here in America, and they are finding that kids are in a seat about 9 hours a day. So that was really eye-opening. They're being driven home, so they're still upright. Often kids are overscheduled. They have a lot of homework, and all those things are still in that upright position. Even some sports like running and soccer, and you're still kind of in an upright position. You might be moving, but you're not spinning in circles, you're not going upside down, you're not moving in the way that we need to create change to the senses. So inside your inner ear are little hair cells, and we need to move in those rapid ways, like I just talked about, so that we can move the fluid back and forth in the inner ear, and that stimulates the hair cells. That actually helps develop what we call the vestibular sense. And that sense is key to all the other senses. So if that is underdeveloped, which we're finding in many kids it is again, number one thing we have to treat in a clinic setting today. If that is not developed properly through ample movement opportunities throughout the day, so I'm talking at least 3 hours of outdoor play a day, that fluid in the inner ear can thicken over time, and it can affect their sense of body awareness and all sorts of issues. So let's break it down for you just a little bit more. The first thing that vestibular sense does is it tells you where your body is in space. So it helps you get from point A to point B safely, to get on and off that playground equipment efficiently. The way we treat this in a clinic setting is we have swings, like I mentioned, hanging from the ceilings in a clinic setting, and we will take a child and put them on the swing and place them in different positions. So and then we spin them. So one of our therapists, her name is Mary Kawar. She worked closely with NASA to develop a tool called the astronaut board, and it literally is just a board that spins. And because before the astronauts go in outer space, they actually get in a machine that moves adults in all different directions, so that they really know where their body is in space when they go into an anti-gravity environment. So that's what we do in a clinic setting. So we want them rolling down hills. We want them spinning in circles till they get dizzy, because that will actually help them become safer in their environment. Sometimes I'll hear adults say, don't spin, you're going to get dizzy, or get down from that rock because you're going to get hurt. But if we constantly do that, we constantly keep them from moving in those ways that their neurological systems are designed to do, then we become the barrier to that neurological development. The other thing that vestibular sense does is it turns on the reticular activating system in the brain to pay attention. And so that's why those kids that were fidgeting in that 5th grade classroom, what they were doing is that vestibular sense, they're moving their body back and forth, and that turns the brain on, it fires it up so they can tune in. So sometimes we'll say, sit still, stop moving, but really those children in that classroom clearly needed to not just move in that moment, but they need to have more movement opportunities so that they can gain the skill of attention. The other thing that that sense does is it supports, it almost acts like a tripod for all 6 eye muscles, like almost like a tripod for a camera where it stabilizes the lens. It does the same for all 6 eye muscles. So it stabilizes them to work as a team, especially when you want your eyes to be scanning for reading and for writing. One time I had a child come in that for therapy, and he was holding one eye. He was in school, and the teacher was saying he's always holding one eye in order to see things. He was 7 years old, and he was having trouble reading. He could read the visual acuity chart, you know, the Snellen eye chart with the letters on it just fine. But just because he has good visual acuity doesn't mean he has perfect vision. It doesn't mean that the muscles can work as a team. And so when he came in for treatment, we had him spin, and then we had, I had him track with a light pen after, and every time he crossed his midline, his eyes would loop, almost like a roller coaster. So with vestibular treatment, after 2 weeks time, he was able to control his eyes, and it wasn't long before he was able to start reading. And so that was really, I guess, eye-opening as well. So behavioral optometrists will work very closely with occupational therapists to treat visual skills. And I've been on podcasts before because they are huge advocates for movement and for supporting visual skills. If you go in their office, you'll see similar things that you'll see in an occupational therapy office. You'll see trampolines and swings as well. So movement, plenty of movement is, again, important for body awareness, being safe in your environment. It's really important to be able to pay attention in class. It's important for reading and writing. But it's also important for what we call emotional regulation and also activity regulation. So if we sometimes call the kids hyper, you know, being able to naturally bring that down again without the need for extra like dimming the lights and coping skills or putting deep pressure on them. We're at the point now where a lot of classrooms are having to implement special exercises like yoga and Pilates, and again, you know, certain music. And I would really want us to just kind of take a step back and, you know, why is this happening? Why are all the children having trouble with regulation and attention? If they were getting plenty of outdoor play time, digging in the dirt for hours, going upside down and moving the body in the ways that it was designed to do, would they need special exercises? And I would argue most likely not. So really, again, looking at the environment and thinking more of a prevention mode for children. One thing I want to mention too is that the children with, you know, the issue here is that there's always going to be children that have struggled with neurological issues, but this is about a majority of children are struggling. And so taking a hard look at our environment, because that shouldn't be the case. There shouldn't be this many children struggling. So after that article went really viral about, you know, why kids fidget and what we can do about it, some other articles came out about, okay, fine, let's just stick the children on bouncy balls, and that's going to help with attention. There was another article where there was bike pedals where kids could bike while they're seated, and that would help them. Now knowing that information, think about, why is that not going to fix the underlying problem? And you can type some answers into the chat box if you want. So the main reason, it actually will help in that moment for some children, not for all, but moving, again, that ignites the vestibular sense and it turns the brain on to pay attention. However, some kids, it can be dysregulating. That can actually increase their arousal level, and now they're up here. So it doesn't work for all children. The other issue is that because the kids are still upright, it's kind of like a Band-Aid approach. It helps in that moment, but it will not create change to the vestibular sense. The vestibular sense is something where you need rapid movement. You know, again, you need that acceleration to actually create change to it. And that sense can actually weaken over time. So it's one reason why adults, when you get older, you might not tolerate rides like you did growing up. So maybe you feel nauseous going on the spinny rides or going on roller coasters, because a lot of us are not moving enough. We're not going upside down or rolling down hills, maybe not doing dancing or something to get you moving in all different ways. So we will advocate for adults to keep moving in order to stay safe and to prevent falls and hip fractures and when they get older. My thing is really advocating for children because they don't always have the choice to move. So we expect them to sit for a good portion of the day. And the fact that they're falling out of their chairs is a really big red flag that we need to do something about it. As well. So what type of movement do children need in order to foster healthy neurological development? They need to move in ways that make adults gasp, basically, right? So they need to climb trees. They need to be able to jump off, little rocks. They need to spin in circles. They need to do all sorts of things that we tend to cringe about. But, within reason, but they really do need to move in all different ways. So the other sense that's really being affected is the proprioceptive sense. And that's the senses in the joints and the muscles. And that is developed through heavy work. And so you'll hear occupational therapists talk about this a lot, like this child needs heavy work. And what that is resistance. So they need to pick up heavy pails. They need to build a dam, right? Picking up those rocks. All of that develops the senses in the joints and muscles, and it helps children to know where their limbs are in relation to each other. And but it also helps them know how much force to use when playing games like tag without hitting too hard, or maybe they're writing with a pencil without breaking the lead every time, or maybe they're not writing hard enough because they're having trouble regulating the force. Holding a frog without squeezing it too much. Those are the kids that want to constantly like jump on other children and give a hug, or they want you to squeeze them. So this again is treated through a lot of heavy work. And so children that do struggle with this, they need outdoor play even more. They need to be digging in the dirt for hours. And building forts, picking up those heavy logs, because that will again develop those senses properly. So really advocating for children's rights too. So if they start taking away tag because kids are getting more aggressive, I guess, hitting with more force, I think it's really important before starting to take away everything to really understand, well, why is this happening in the first place? So when you step outdoors, over time, what I've realized is that outdoors is where it's the ultimate sensory experience. And as occupational therapists, we are considered sensory experts. And I really started just looking at our clinics a little bit differently, where we treat children. And after years of observing kids out in the woods and comparing that to the clinic setting and also to the classroom setting, I realized that when we step outdoors, it can give a sensory experience that you cannot replicate indoors. And so we're going to dive into that a little bit as well. So a couple things is when you step outdoors, first of all, think about the room that you're in right now. If you're indoors, think about the sensations that you're experiencing, and then think about being out on the beach or being out in the woods or out in nature. What senses are engaged out there that wouldn't necessarily be engaged inside? And you can again write in the chat box, mainly so you guys can see each other's responses. I'm going to see if I can open it up too. Yeah, I can. Great. So what are some of the senses that are engaged outside that you wouldn't have inside? So some of the differences are the smells are different. Good. Touch, different textures outside. Yep, the wind. What else? Yeah, wind. Yep, different. So depth perception, the lighting is different outside. The noises are different too. So when you step outdoors, you hear bird sounds, you hear nature sounds, temperature differences, right? It could be warm, it could be cold, it could be wet, it could be snowing on you. The space is different. So when you step outdoors, often there's more space, and we're going to talk about that in a minute and how important that is for children. Yep, and gross motor, there's a lot of ability to move in ways that you're allowed, move that big body movement we're talking about outdoors. The ground is different too, isn't it? Right. So indoors, it's usually smooth. You don't have to think about it much. You step outdoors, it's uneven. It's constantly challenging your muscles and your balance. Yeah, the ability to take risks outside, freedom of movement. Good. Great. All right, I'm going to move that to the side for a minute. So now the ideal state for what we call sensory integration to happen, which is basically organization of the senses, and that lays the foundation for learning, is to be in a calm but alert state. So again, you look outside and the colors you see are right, greens, blues, browns, right? So very calming stimuli. We'll paint our preschools those colors, even our prisons, right? The noises outside. So you go for a massage and you'll hear nature sounds, right? You hear bird sounds, they'll play crashing waves, very calming stimuli. Certain smells of trees will actually reduce the cortisol levels in the brain. So there's definitely a reason why doctors say bring your baby outdoors to calm them down. So we know that nature is naturally calming, even the smells. But you're still alert, aren't you? Because you have to pay attention. The ground's uneven, like we talked about. You might see an animal run by. You're constantly assessing your environment and what's around you. So you tend to be in this calm alert state when you're outdoors. And so we want to think about what percentage of time are children in an environment that's conducive to that sensory integration. And what percentage of time are they in an environment that might be the opposite? It might be disorganizing or dysregulating. I often think about even classrooms sometimes where, if the space is really small, where children are really packed in close together, even just being close to other children can change the game for some kids. The noises, the acoustics in the room are going to be different. The posters on the walls could be disorganizing. So really starting to look at environments and a little bit differently. Okay, so we're going to the next slide. And so here's some examples. And I'll have you guys probably write in the chat for this because I want you to start thinking about this a little differently. So these are both considered a sensory experience, right? The one on picture on the left is something that you would see in an OT clinic. And there's not necessarily anything wrong with it, but what I like to do is I like to take a step back and look at if our true objective, because these are both considered a sensory experience, a child on a log and then a child on a sensory balance beam that's engineered to be sensory. If our true objective is to create change to the senses, then which environment, I guess balance beam, you might call it, would be more conducive to that? And why? All right, so the one on the right, what is happening on the right that you're not going to get on the left? So right away, you see that the feet are dirty, right? That's an obvious one. So tactile right away. Yep, so it's uneven. So it's going to challenge you more. It's constantly challenging. The textures are changing. Right? So it might be crunchy leaves, and then you're processing that, making new connections to the brain. Now you're touching moss, multi-sensory, full body. Yep, there's an element of risk. You're off the ground. When you start walking on the balance beam, you'll notice it moves. So now you're going to be challenging dynamic balance, where the one on the left is going to be static. It's not going to move. It's free. So the one on the right is free. The one on the left is a couple $100. All the other stuff we talked about, right? So the wind, right? The temperature changes. You have multiple things going on. The lighting is different. The calming environment. You might have other children right there as well. That child, sometimes when children have sensory issues, there's often anxiety tied into that. And so sometimes when you are working in a setting where you're going to say, now we're doing this, and you have a plastic balance beam in front of them, that can sometimes, that preconceived we're doing this right now, can actually rise anxiety level in children with sensory issues. So the one on the right, if it's presented as a choice and no one says anything and the child happens to walk on that, that's definitely going to reduce anxiety level. And it will become most likely more meaningful. So again, thinking about what is truly meaningful to the child. Often they might get on the balance beam, they might get off. There's other children. So lots to think about here. So here's another example. These are both considered a sensory experience. Again, there's nothing wrong with sensory bins. I use them from time to time, but I'm just getting us to step back and look at, creating environments that create, really rich sensory experiences. And if our true objective, again, is to create change to the senses, which environment do you think will better meet the need for that particular objective? So people are saying most likely on the left. Now, what is happening on the left that you're not getting on the right-hand side? And there's a lot. So the first thing is they're fully immersed. That's right. So it's a fully immersed sensory experience. So the one on the right is restricted again, aren't you? So you have a certain amount of space, a certain amount of time. You might need an adult to step in a little bit because you might be concerned about them getting the mess out. Whereas over on the left, it doesn't matter. But it's a fully immersed environment. You might be able to put your hands in the sandbox. Let's see, what else? Wet hair. Temperature changes. Yep. What else do you see in the picture on the left? So there's other children in the environment. So again, you have more space, more children are able to, you're going to get that social interaction. The opportunities on the left are endless. So the play opportunities there's going to be much more possibilities out there. A stick could be a million different things. We call it affordances. You might see that child over there use that stick in a way that you haven't thought of, and then that inspires you to play in a different way. Whereas the one on the right is a little bit of a preconceived like plastic gardening theme. So there's going to be less affordances, less opportunities for play ideas on the right. So there's a lot. The one on the left, the smells, you've got all the nature things we talked about. You can't see your feet, it's uneven, it's going to be challenging the body more in the senses, all sorts of stuff. All right, so I'm going to show you a video of this in action. It's not, because I'm on a Prezi, it's not perfect, but at least I just want you to kind of observe, make some observations, okay? Oops. So they're creating a giant obstacle course in the mud, obviously. All right, so this was an experience where they had the opportunity, we're again really careful with our wording, to create a giant obstacle course through the mud. So basically there was a bunch of what we call loose parts materials out there that can be used for many purposes. So there's no agenda from the adults, it's up to them how they want to design it. So planks, they had created a ladder that they used, tires, that sort of thing. What did you notice during the video? What were some observations you saw as they were creating this? So child initiated teamwork. Yep, they're all lots of teamwork. Fully immersed sensory experience again. Collaboration, communication. There was a lot of communication. Do you feel like most of the children were fully engaged? Yes. So excitement in their voices. Yes. So an engagement can look very different for different children. So you'll see that there's like a child sitting there, for instance, watching. And even though he's observing the play, that for him is that's what he wants to do. And I still feel like he's fully engaged. And the key with play is that it's a choice, right? So this other little boy just said, "Oh, that's disgusting." So verbally processing what they're going through, he goes in and out of the mud and talks about it. There's mixed ages, so we do that in purpose as well. Again, we're trying to bring as authentic the occupation of play back, restore it for children, and make it as authentic as possible. So true neighborhood play is a mixture of ages. We don't put all 5-year-olds together. It's very much like when I grew up, I didn't only play with 5-year-olds. I played with whoever was out there. And there's great benefits to that. For many reasons. They model more advanced language skills, more advanced play skills. The little kids will go up to the big kids to help with tying knots, that sort of thing. So that's really important to notice. Another thing is we always have children with special needs attend our programming, but you usually can't tell who they are. And it's a totally inclusive model. We don't take all the children that do have special needs and create camp just for that, because we feel like they should be totally immersed into the program. And again, we'll see the greatest transformation stories with those children. For instance, if a child has trouble with social skills, they're going to have that peer modeling of more advanced social skills that actually helps them as well. Now, some of the kids were barefoot, you probably noticed, and some kids were wearing shoes. So that's another thing. They always have a choice here. When children have any kind of sensory issues, there's often anxiety tied to that. So even if I suggested, I think you should take your shoes off, that can actually rise the anxiety level in children. I had an example of that where a little boy came one time with plastic welly boots. And he said, "I know we're going to the mud puddles today." He said, "But I'm not taking my shoes off." So I said, "That's fine." So we went down, and what happened was some of the children were in the mud puddle catching frogs. And he got so excited that he went right in without thinking. The mud went into his welly boots, and he came out and said, "This is disgusting," because he had socks on too. He's like, "This is so gross. Can I take this off?" And I said, "Sure." So he took his socks and shoes off and went right in barefoot. Now, I told his mom after, we had a video of him and everything, and she goes, "That is so amazing," because they had been working 2 years in a clinic setting to get him to go barefoot, unsuccessful. And now, if I had said, "I think you should take your shoes off," what do you think would have happened from the beginning? So if I had said, "I think you should take your shoes off," usually there's a control thing with that. And so he probably would have said no. Yeah, and it would have raised anxiety level. So now that child actually started going barefoot in camping and in other environments outdoors, because this is a real environment too. That's another big thing, is it generalizes over into other real environments. So just because a child goes, let's say, back to the balance beam, the plastic sensory engineered balance beam, just because they go barefoot on a plastic beam does not generalize necessarily to walking outdoors in the dirt. It's a very different tactile experience. So I think the more real sensory experiences we can give children from a very early age, the better off they're going to be. In fact, I think babies should be on the ground and crawling and playing in the dirt right from the beginning, because they haven't really developed the fear as much and the cognitive awareness. So the more exposure they get at an early age, the better off. So I definitely don't recommend waiting till they're 3 and then putting them on the beach or in the grass and I often see kids have a lot of anxiety around that. The other nice thing about babies on the ground is when they're crawling, that deep pressure actually helps to override that light touch sense that can feel aversive. And when they're getting that deep pressure, it integrates that light touch sense. And so having babies crawl outdoors right from an early age will actually help them to start tolerating different textures and also develop the hand muscles to be able to grasp and do things later on with utensils and writing. All right, so and get out of here. Bear with me. I'm not sure why it's not letting me stop. There we go. So I am going to, let's see, I'm going to end with this slide because I realized that we already used up most of our time. So just a couple other things that being outdoors does that's incredibly therapeutic is when you step outdoors, even just the bird sounds around you help you to orient your body to and help with the body awareness. We have this thing called therapeutic listening that a lot of therapists are trained in, and there's special CDs that we have children listen to. It helps with all sorts of things, like everything from bedwetting to being auditory processing, being able to respond to their name quickly, all sorts of things. One day I was looking at it, one of the CDs that said spatial awareness on it was all bird sounds. So I called up one of the founders and asked her, so tell me, if children were outdoors listening to bird sounds, not necessarily listening to your CD, would that affect their spatial awareness? And she said, absolutely. First of all, they went to Australia to do the recordings where there's a huge range in bird sounds over there. And she said, and they enhanced that. She said, if you step outdoors and you hear a bird tweet in one direction, a bird tweet behind you, and another bird in the distance, she said, what you're doing is you're orienting yourself to the sounds around you. She said that orientation is the basis for spatial awareness. So even just listening to bird sounds will help with spatial awareness. Going barefoot is really important for so many reasons. It will actually help with preventing some sensory issues such as walking on their toes. We actually recommend kids walk on uneven terrain to help correct that. It helps them to develop the small muscles in the foot and on the ankles more as well. Another really interesting one that we kind of started talking about is a lot of kids aren't tolerating getting dirty on their hands and that sort of thing. And the way, again, to override that is through deep pressure. We'll often do brushing programs with children to help override that. And so when you provide sensory experiences outdoors, for instance, playing on the beach is a really good one compared to a little sandbox. The difference is when you're playing on the beach, you're digging deep into the dirt. And so you're getting that heavy work and that deep pressure at the same time as that light touch. And so that's actually helping to integrate and that light touch sense. Whereas when you're in a bin playing with sand, you're just stimulating the light touch, but you're not actually helping to override it and integrate it. So again, when you play outdoors, that's when you start to really integrate senses and create change to them as well. So I'm just going to skip ahead to this last video of kids, they're creating they often create hierarchies and forts and villages out in our woods. And so I just want you to watch this video, and I'll end with a quick story and we can ask questions.
Friends, we're here. Help, you have to build it. Yep. Okay. Is TJ really on his side? Come on, build it. Put a load over here and go inside the waterproof. I got a load. Go, people, go. Guys, we know TJ could be lying about he's on our side, right? We know. If he does anything strange, we fire him. Who? TJ. Here's more. Need this much? Dad, I know what's wrong. Yeah. I can see. Dad, somebody's not on our team. I know it.
So one thing I wanted to really mention before we close is something that I've noticed over the years is when the adults are step back and we're not right in their play space, it actually empowers the kids to solve their own conflicts and come up with their own play ideas. We're at the point where adults are directing a lot of the play opportunities for children. And so children are losing the ability to even initiate a play idea and then to execute it and have hours to play out that play scheme. I've noticed over the years, if I stood too close to kids playing, that they would start turning to the adult to solve their problems or to seek constant reassurance. Is this okay? Is that okay? The other thing they'll do is they'll tattle on each other. And we notice if we backed up, so we were still supervising them, but we reduced the adult presence out there, they would start to turn to each other to solve their own problems. And I feel like this is so important for social emotional skills and conflict resolution. And that we just need to give them the opportunity to do so. So I wanted to end with a story of this and how powerful it was. It was such a perfect example. We had a little group of girls they were building a teepee very similar to this. And this boy had gone up to them and all of a sudden he said, "You need to let me play." And he was yelling. He was really upset. So we were training at the time too. This was a couple years back. And right away as adults, we want to get in there and we want to solve it for them. But something told me to just step back and just see what happens. So we were there again, supervising, making sure that they were safe. But the little boy, what he did was he yelled at them. They ended up linking hands, the little girls, and they formed a chain and said, "No, no, no, we won't." And so he got mad and he stole their gems. And so he ran with their gems around the woods, and they ended up chasing him around the woods over and over. And so we're like, okay, something's bound to happen. He's going to get tired or whatnot. And again, they weren't hurting each other. They were just like having an argument. So we were just wanting to see how this would play out. And so finally he stopped and he said, "Fine, just take your gems." And he went over to a tree and he was crossing his arms and he was sulking. He was very mad. The girls went back and rebuilt their teepee and they were singing a song. But what happened was one of the little girls actually went over and sat down beside him, and we couldn't hear the exact conversation, but we could hear the tone of the voice. And so she starts talking to him. Right away, his voice rises again. He's blah, blah, blah. He's yelling at her. She puts her hand up like stop, talk to the hand type thing. And he gets really quiet and he calms down. And then his voice raises again and he starts yelling again. And then she calmly puts her hand up, waits till he regulates and starts talking. Then he starts talking and his voice comes down and they have a conversation. At the end of the conversation, you see her wave him on, and that little boy was authentically included in their fort for the rest of the week. So that was a huge learning experience for me, because if we had gone in right from the very beginning and said, "You need to let him play," what opportunities do you think they would have missed out on? So what do you think? see if I can get to the question and answer thing. So some of the things that they learned right away, I feel like the girl could practice empathy, which is something you have to experience. She had advanced communication skills to be able to empathetically help him through process what happened. He had probably learned that yelling wasn't probably the best way to be included. You know, whining doesn't work on other children. Yeah, they learned to negotiate. One of the most important lessons was they authentically solved their own problem without the need of an adult intervention. That was huge. The other thing is that he was authentically included and it was no longer an issue. So if we had said, you need to let him play, he could have resented them and it could have been an ongoing issue all week and vice versa. They could have, you know, resented him as well. Yeah, advanced communication skills. He actually became a leader over time too, which was interesting. But sometimes you just have to have those experiences where children say, that's not okay, or let's talk about this. So I thought that was really great. Yeah, modeling from the girl on how to calmly work through something. Yeah, and practicing regulation of emotions, being able to get upset and it's okay, is really important as well. So we need to really allow for more opportunities for children to come up with their own play ideas, um, develop more advanced play schemes, have hours and space to play, and solve their own problems. You know, work on all the skills, the life skills that we really desperately want them to have. And I tell you, during this pandemic, this is needed more than ever. That children need to connect and play in order to heal through this. So really prioritizing that, even if it's just with one other child. These children really, really need this right now. So any questions for me about what we covered?
Yeah,
Okay.
Angela.
Oh yeah, Angela, just before we've questions, I'm just going to share, Joanne's going to ask questions. I'm just going to share the poll, the 2 mentees that we posted.
Yes.
So I'll take control of the screen just because it's so interesting.
Yeah. So the questions we had asked is how much playtime you got as an adult growing up. You know, so this is, you know, how much unrestricted outdoor playtime you got through on a typical day when you were growing up.
So this is, you know, everybody got at least 2 hours and 4 and 5 and 6 hours and even up to 12 hours. So a huge amount of,
That's
yeah.
amazing.
So that's really interesting because I'll just share the second question then, which was, will I say?
So, and that's a typical response. So typically when I ask this to audiences, it's between 4 and 6 hours a day that adults got growing up of unrestricted outdoor play. And then yeah, think about a child that you know or a child in your family and how much outdoor playtime they are getting currently.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share that now. So you can see, again, it's 58 responses, mainly 1, 2, and maximum 3 hours. And not if you go to 4, 1, and 1 to 7, and 2 to 8.
Wow, that's amazing. And the average response I get for that is 45 minutes to an hour and a half. I think the research is 48 minutes, but that was a couple years ago. I'm sure it's even less. And so that's, if you think about how much time, 4 to 6 hours of, again, digging in the dirt, playing outside, moving in different ways to, and, you know, 48 minutes, that's a significant change in their environment. So it's bound to affect child development.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Angela. I'll hand you over to Joanne, but just to say that Peter Gray has written widely on this and said that the rise in anxiety is a direct correlation to the reduction in play. And I think even in one generation, the poll shows that so clearly. So
absolutely.
Yeah. Thank you very, very much. How fabulous. I'll put you over to Joanne now.
Okay, great.
Great. Thank you, Angela. That was fantastic. So many questions coming in. It's amazing. People are very curious about a lot of the issues or a lot of the things you've spoken about. So I'll just go through a few of them. We'll see how many we do. as we go. Brenda was asking, for those whose vestibular sense is not developed, can we reverse it? And there was
Yes.
also another question related to that. Is there an age limit to develop vestibular
That's a
system?
really good question. So the first 7 years is really critical for sensory development, and so that we can see greater change in those ages. However, we can create change even in adults, but it just takes longer for those for older for adults and for older children. But it's kind of like also the muscular system, you have to do it multiple times a week to get really strong muscles, or the aerobic, like you have to get cardio a couple days a week to change your heart and lungs. The vestibular is the same. You have to move frequently in order to even just maintain it. So we do want to keep moving.
Great. Thanks for that. And then there's another question, I suppose Tim has asked, plenty of research suggesting the biggest barrier to outdoors play in childcare settings is generally the adults don't want to go outside.
Yeah.
Have you noticed this as well in your research and in your work?
Yeah, it's really, I think that, yes, that is definitely the biggest barrier. And there's a lot of fear. I think by far that's the biggest barrier is fear. And it's funny because we had Anita Bundy come speak to our group at Timbrook a couple years ago, and she's an occupational a therapist that's renowned for doing outdoor play too. She did the Sydney playground project, and she said they researched parents' perceptions of the risky play and the teachers' perceptions, and she said it's all about fear. She goes, but not in the way that you might think it, not that they're going to get hurt per se, but more that they're afraid of what other people might think of them, or the teachers didn't want to lose their job, and the parents didn't want to be a bad parent, I guess. So that was very interesting. But yes, that's definitely the biggest barrier.
Yeah, I think you're correct there. It is, and we would see that quite regularly, trying to get, even for
Yes.
ourselves, to get students to come outside and do some of
and
that
I
stuff. It can be a
and
challenge
what
at times.
Absolutely, and I feel like one of the most important things is to educate them. And once people's eyes are open to how important this is, because as a healthcare professional, I was always taught to do no harm, and we're at the point where we're actually creating harm to children. And once you realize that, it's hard to go back.
It is, yeah. I suppose leading on from that question is Stephanie has asked, how would you go about explaining to parents the benefit of an increased approach to outdoor and risky play?
Right.
And if they're hesitant, particularly if they're hesitant in this form of play.
Yeah, so that's kind of what I was just getting at is when you can link it, like you start to say, well, this is connected to this, it's very eye-opening, and it starts to strip away at the fears. And a lot of the fears are unfounded. And the fears can actually create more harm. So yeah, I think again, education, and also baby steps, I think, for parents, because sometimes we expect them to take it all in at once. So like bite-sized information is
Yeah.
really, I think, important.
Very good. Yeah, absolutely. Another question was that we must consider spatial justice. Who owns the space? Who has the right to take up the space? Have you considered that particularly in relation to children?
Spatial justice. I have
Yeah.
not I haven't really come across that so much. Like I feel like really my work is really a form of, it's like we call it occupational justice for OT,
Yeah,
so it's a little
okay.
different term, but it's the right for children to have the occupation. So I think that it's really important to figure out, and to fight. I think that there would be crossover, because
I
to
think
fight
you
for
you
children,
actually touched on it there, where you
yeah,
stood back from children's play and you gave them that spatial justice.
yeah,
What you spoke about when the children solved their own problems, and that in relation to you
yes,
gave them that space to take, and had you the right to actually step in and take up that space with them, or was it better to stand back and let them
yeah, absolutely.
do it?
It's
Yeah,
so important.
so important. Um, Somebody wants to know where they can access your research, Angela.
Yeah, so you can find it on timbrook.com is some of our research. The Balance and Barefoot has all the research in it as well. So if you want a resource that has everything compiled in one, and then I do a lot of writing for the Washington Post. So if you want a quick, like, because there's so much more, I feel like I could talk to you guys for at least 2 hours, but there's so much more to this. So some of those articles will help, the book will help as well.
Yep. And let me see, was there another question? Yeah, somebody asked what would help a child that has a problem with speech. I don't know, I know occupational therapy and speech therapy might be two different things, but how can the outdoor helps in that regard? And do you feel anything that would work around children's speech?
Yeah, so two things. One is the ability to move actually helps support the language center. So having ample opportunity to move, having a choice reduces anxiety level, especially when there's anxiety around speech. It's funny because my youngest, they felt like he had selective mutism, which means that he's afraid to talk in social situations. And so in a typical preschool setting, actually it was a really nice preschool setting, but he struggled, but at Timbernook for some reason he flourished. And I don't know if it was because the mix ages too. A lot of those children were more advanced in play and language, so they would pull him into the play and talk to him. And so I think that having those more advanced language skills is also really important in modeling through play. So I think it's very conducive to that, and social skills, like working on more
Totally, yeah.
advanced social skills.
Yeah, absolutely. Somebody asked, how does Timberlook get around the legal aspect of children getting hurt or that litigation? And that has come up a few times in relation to insurance for this
Yeah,
type of
so
work. People had concerns around that. Is there anything
yeah,
you can
so
offer?
we have to have insurance, so we all have our own insurance. So a lot of our Timbernook sites around the world, we don't own them. We train them to use our program. So it's a license opportunity, not a franchise. So we license them to take our program. So we also certify schools to use our program, and the schools have run Timbernook. So, and we have like hospital, so we have a lot of people that will have the permission and license to use the program and the training. And they have ongoing support, but they all have their own insurance to cover their programming. So a school's insurance will look different than a private clinic, and it depends on who's running it too. So a clinician might have different insurance. So it's a good question.
It is a good question, yeah. And it's
And
always
we
a concern for people, I suppose.
Yeah. They sign waivers too as well.
Okay. Yeah, very good. There was another question where somebody had around, have you any good resources for transferring these ideas to adolescents and maybe help them nurture some of this stuff that they missed when they were younger?
Yeah, so we do run programming to age 14. So technically, I think our experiences would work for adults as well. We actually had the design team for children's shoes from Merrill Shoe Company come out and did a Timbernook experience, and they were up in the tree and having just as much fun. So we've had people interested in us doing adult experience because I think we're not done playing. It's just we might not be able to move as quick and climb trees as fast, but I do believe that children, that's why our program goes to age 14. I don't believe children are done playing. And so we really need to advocate for this kind of programming all the way through. There's a lot of programs just for little kids, and they really need that time. So our schools will do Timbernook for middle school children as well, usually once a week, so that it's like a culmination of what they learned during the week as well. So
great. We might take one more question because I know we're coming to that time. There's somebody, Caroline here has said, I work with a child who has spinal muscular dystrophy, so she has to stay in her chair to help her posture and scoliosis. She's 4. So outdoor play opportunities are limited for her.
Yes.
She plays with the sand table, but I wonder, would she still benefit from a more natural sensory experiences like mud pits? Any other suggestions?
Yeah,
You might
absolutely.
recommend, yeah.
Yeah, and I would if she has therapies, I would suggest that getting the therapist on board because they can help with positioning and everything, but could she play near a mud puddle? I know it
Yeah.
sounds so crazy, but I think it's so important and it's a real sensory experience. Could she get out there? It depends on her developmental skills, but we've also had children with physical challenges. We've worked with a company that has wheelchairs that make it more accessible to go outdoors so they
Yeah.
can play outside. And so that's a really important thing too, is making this accessible for all children. And we had a little boy with cerebral palsy out there that he had the time of his life, and he didn't need physical therapy that week because he was
Yeah.
climbing and doing all sorts of things. He abandoned his crutches. He was walking through the mud puddles with his crutches, and it's amazing.
Yeah, it is. It is, and it's around thinking outside the box and trying to
Yeah.
facilitate children to do that. Well, Angela, honestly, thanks so much. That was just so wonderful experience, and Angela's presentation will be available on the website. And just on tomorrow, I just think, Angela, you've really set the scene for tomorrow, because some of the talk with Tim Gill for starters, and with Anya Bird, but also the workshops from some of our lecturers here in GMIT and some other people, really fits into this around the outdoor experience in Ireland, and I suppose applying what you're talking about to our own context here in the west of Ireland and wherever anybody else is. So I think it'll really set the scene. I think it really has set it up for tomorrow and given people a lot of excitement about that as well. So thank you so much, Angela. It was absolutely wonderful to have you.
Thank you so much for having me. Enjoy the rest of your conference.
Thanks very much. Mary, are we finished there for now? Did you want to say a few words before we finish up?
And no, just echo what you said. Thank you so much, and we can see from the comments and the engagement how much people have got. So,
and we had up on 280 people on the webinar tonight, which is absolutely wonderful. Thanks to everyone, and we hope to see you again tomorrow.
Bye.
Bye.